Okay, well, welcome everybody to Classroom to the Warehouse, how school specialty aced and continues to ace labor management. The information discussed in this session represents the views of individuals and does not constitute legal advice. You should consult your organization's leadership and legal counsel. Hello, my name is Dave Christine. I'm a managing director at Alpine, and I will be your moderator today. And I want to turn this over to the guys you really want to hear from, our resident experts. Take it away, guys.
Thanks a lot, Dave. Appreciate the introduction. My name is Jim Chamberlain. I'm Senior Managing Director at Alpine Supply Chain Solutions, and I have been involved with labor management one way or another over my entire career. I started my first assignment in North Bergen, New Jersey, working with Teamsters Union to roll out a labor management program. So I survived that, and it's something that's stuck with me over the years, and very passionate about it. And I'm excited today to tell you a little bit more about the school specialty journey that they're on. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to my counterpart, Bryce, and let him introduce himself.
Hello, I'm Bryce Frank. I'm Senior Director of Operations for school specialty in the Appleton, Wisconsin locations. I've been in manufacturing and distribution for about 30 years. Done everything from glass to school supplies. So I've dealt with this in many different ways, and this one seemed to really work out for us, and we're excited to share that with you today.
All right. So for all of you listening today, you actually have an opportunity to watch Bryce and I present twice. We are actually going to be also presenting this same content at the Work Annual Conference in New Orleans on June 10th. So if you're heading down to work, do look Bryce and I up, and we'd love to chat with you, one-on-one a little bit more about this particular journey that they went on. And really, the big part about it is that, as you would imagine, the back to school period is just the huge peak crunch time for school specialties. So think of July, August, September. All of the efforts are really geared towards making sure that when your kids are ready to go back to school, that all the classrooms, all the supplies are there for them. So literally, they're doing 60 to 70% of their volume in this 3-month period. And so in the past, it's been an area that they've really struggled with because they're bringing in a lot of associates. There's so many people on the floor, and it was always hard to keep track of who's doing well, who's where, how many people should we have in different areas. And so the labor management program was a huge benefit for them, and something that we were really striving to get in place for the 2024 back to school season in order for them to be more successful than they've been in the past. So we got a pretty packed agenda here, and hopefully we can share a bunch of stories that'll highlight each of these areas that we're going to be covering. So without any further ado, I'm going to just turn it over to Bryce and have him give you a little bit more of a background on what school specialty is, who they are, and what's important to them.
So school specialty has been in the business for school supplies for roughly 60 years. And we do everything from paper clips to furniture and everything in between. The big thing with school specialty that makes us a little bit different is the very unique peak that we have, where 70% or 65-ish% of our business is done in about a 12 to 15 week period. And it just follows the the budgets of schools. They want their supplies before the classrooms start, and we have a very short window for when they place their order to get it to the classroom. So we've been doing this for a lot of years and gone through many different changes. But the biggest thing that we really strive for is on time and complete. And some of these LMS tools helped us improve our shipments and our delivery times. This is kind of our mission: to engage, inspire with everyone from crayons to curriculum to complete the learning environments. And that's very important to us because there's many pieces in between, and there's nothing worse than a student or a teacher that wouldn't have supplies or furniture available when the classroom, when the school season starts. This is kind of our vision statement: people, passion, purpose. We really strive for strong communication, collaboration with the teams. We really take a focus on customer satisfaction, continuous improvement, and how we can do better and give more to the customer. And we definitely strive for commitment to do the very best and treat everyone with dignity and respect.
All right, and a little bit about Alpine. So we are a supply chain consulting company, and you can kind of think of us as someone that can do the whole life cycle journey with our clients, from determining where their facilities should be located, doing distribution network analysis studies, to facility design, layout work, site selection. We get into the technology. We can help you to properly select the WMS or ERP, TMS, YMS that is a match for your business. We help our clients with system implementations as well as HR activities on the people side. And when it really comes down to it, Alpine's role in this particular project was as enabler. We weren't going to be owning the project or the program once it was implemented. That was all going to be in Bryce's hands and his team. So our goal was to make sure that, in an analogy type of way, that we were at the table teaching, leading, and then as the project went on, we were at the table listening, contributing, and then finally we were at the outer rims of the room, only contributing or updating as needed. And then now we're kind of like phone a friend. So from the how to use the system, how to do reporting, doing observations, all of the different aspects, we're just there to make sure that Bryce and his team had everything they needed to be successful, knowing ultimately that they would be owning the program, and that we would be moving on into the background. So like we mentioned, heavy influx of part-time and seasonal labor that comes into the building. And part of what we're looking to do too is we know that some of the people that come in during that summer, we might not see them again till next summer. They might be, high school or college students that are coming in just for the summer for work. Others are part-timers where we might look to convert them to full-time employees. So with the mix of full-time, part-time, and seasonal, what was really a struggle for Bryce and his team is to know, well, who's good? Who should we work with more? Who should we potentially look to keep long-term because they're doing really well? And there was just a lot of blind spots within the operation. So with labor, what we were able to do in this project is we were able to track every single employee. We were able to bucket them into groups. So we could say, okay, here's my seasonal group. Here's my part-time group. Here's my full-time group. How are each of the groups doing as a whole? Who are the people that need help in each areas? Who of them maybe just aren't going to be a good fit? So there was a lot of that that the labor management system was going to really help in terms of visibility, because in the past, we really didn't have good predictability. We didn't have consistency. We, had a short training window, and a lot of times for the functions that were being worked on, it was heavy word of mouth or tribal knowledge. So with the labor program, what we wanted to be able to do is have every function documented so that whether you're new, seasoned, or just seasonal, you knew this defined success for each of the job functions within the warehouse. And we were starting to drive consistency even with people that we knew were only going to be with us for up to 3 months. So our timeline, you know, why not make it a challenge, right? So we ended up kicking off the project in April of 2025, and our go live was July 7th. And I just mentioned to you that our peak is July, August, September. So we had no backfall, or if you will, we had to make sure we hit that date. If we started bleeding into August, we would really be chasing our tail during this project. So we worked very hard with our PMP approach. We had weekly update meetings. We had executive one-on-one sponsorship meetings, all these things so that we stayed on track and we were able to deliver on time, because Bryce just kept telling me, Jim, July 7th, that's the date. And I go, I know, we'll hit it. And happy to report we did hit that go live date, and last year's back to school peak was a very nice success, and it really was just the beginning of the journey that Bryce and his team have embarked upon. So this was our timeline, and we had 14 weeks from the time we kicked off till go live and go live support. The first 2 weeks of the project were focused on interface and configuration. So we had the Blue Yonder WMS, and we were integrating to the module, the Blue Yonder labor management. So we had to make sure that for every one of the direct job functions, we had all the plumbing set up so that we could report accurately on all those different job functions. Once we had the interface and configuration set up, we moved into our best practices phase of the project. So for 4 weeks, we were out there looking and observing at all the different job functions to create the best practices associated with those. And that was a very interesting and fun journey, because we would go out there and we'd say, here's what we saw. We saw maybe 5, 6 different ways to do certain things within job functions. And we would say, is this a best practice? Do we want to do it this way? Or is this something that we shouldn't be doing going forward? And we had a lot of spirited discussions, and where we ended up landing on all the job functions is this is the way we want to train every employee to do the job so that we have consistent results each and every time we do it. And it sets the next function down the line up for success. So if we do all these things correctly in receiving, our put away people, they're going to be able to be successful. We everything in put away right, all the people that are doing picking or replenishment, they're going to be successful, and so on. So that was really fun. And I think my advice to everybody there is, when you're rolling out labor management, you want to create your goals, your expectancies based off of the best way to do it going forward at that particular moment, not creating goals based on practices that are not world class. Then once we got the best practices established, we did reasonable expectancies on those. And then we did the validation of those standards to make sure that our goals were accurate for all the different job functions. And that kind of flows into the next phase, which is observations. And the observations helped us to do some of the validation, because when we went out on the floor, we would watch and observe, and we'd see performance, we'd see people doing the best practices, and we'd understand if we had a hand in glove fit with the best practices and the actual reasonable expectancies. Once we went through all of that, we went live, turned the system on, and at that point, we had boots on the ground from Alpine supporting Bryce's team, and we started reporting results, and we actually started executing what I would call the leader standard work and the daily routines associated with the labor management program.
So Jim, you were looking at really April of 2024, right?
Correct. Yep.
Yeah, to July 7th of 2024.
Yep.
You got a little ahead there for a minute, and we were thinking your head was already in 2025.
Oh, sorry. I was jumping into my time machine. Sorry about that. So in
Good.
preparation for all this work and everything that we talked about, you got to ID your team, so who from school specialty was going to be our super user. We established all the roles and responsibilities of all the people so that we kind of knew as we did, responsibility charts and such, that who was going to own the different aspects of the different deliverables. We did kickoff presentations to the management team and all of the associates. So every shift, every function, everybody got to say, or got to be a part of those kickoff meetings and see what was, going to be coming their way, what their role was. And we were able to answer questions. And so we really tried to make sure that we minimize the amount of angst or fear of the group because we're moving into a new way of doing our work, and so we were really focused on making sure the messaging was there and we're communicating early and often. And then I mentioned these cadence of meetings to make sure we always stayed on track, on time, and on budget. So
With this, we
yeah, go
saw
ahead.
how important was it for all this communication, given that kind of the myth or the kind of the downside push behind labor standards is always, I'm going to let somebody go, or I'm going to make jobs harder because it's too easy for them, things like that comes out of the the persona of labor standards.
Yeah, it's a great question, and we really wanted to make sure that people understood the benefits of the labor program and what's in it for me, what's it going to do for me. And so people that have been through the peak season, they understood that, hey, we're working every Saturday, sometimes we're coming in Sundays, long hours. And with the labor program, we said this is going to help us all to be more efficient, safe, consistent, error-free, which helps us to not have to have as much overtime during the peak season. So you get a little bit better work-life balance. We're showing people how to work smarter, and we're tapping into them and asking their opinion on why is this happening, or what are your thoughts? How can we remove these barriers to make your job easier? Which helped us also to make the work environment a more positive environment during this peak season when all the bullets are flying. And finally, the way we sold it was it's job security, because if we do our work better, smarter, we're going to be a low cost provider, and that's going to appeal to our clients, and that's going to mean we're growing and we're adding headcount.
Good deal.
So next, we wanted to make sure that this wasn't just a kumbaya, rah, rah, it feels good. We said, all right, we got to make sure, as we report up to the C-level, the C-suite within school specialty, that this has bottom line impacts. So we started by measuring the cost per case pre-labor management at the highest level. So all of our costs to ship from a variable labor perspective, and then all the volume that went out, simple math at a high level. And then we drilled down into the throughput level of units per man hour. We also looked at utilization. So out of an 8-hour day, how many of those hours are productive, where we're actually adding value for our clients? And then drilling down into the job code level. So we had all 4 levels measured pre-go live. And then as we turn the system on, we continue to measure these so that we made sure there wasn't that balloon thing where we squeezed in one area and the air just moved up to another. This was the way we knew that the savings were actually going to the bottom line, by tracking these. So I've kind of talked about a lot of the aspects of labor management. I'm going to turn it back over to Bryce because there was so much going on from the people side of things that is probably even more important. It was more important than the engineering type work that we were doing from an Alpine perspective.
So with bringing on labor management, it was definitely something new to what school specialty had recently had. We had productivity and rates, but they were kind of after the fact. It was done by an old Excel program that took a person, 4 hours a day to plug in the numbers, and it was always a kind of a day late. So we had to kind of regroup as a leadership team and really come up with, some fundamental trainings, the leadership traits, leading change, because that's the big one. And not only for the employees on the floor, but for the middle management supervisory level that we're doing a lot of these changes and observations, we're going to have to learn. So we worked with Alpine very effectively and had these leadership meetings and change management meetings to help us understand the best way and the best way to approach when doing observations. And you'll hear me talk about observations a lot as we continue to go forward, because it's a key piece to the labor management system. And we had to change kind of our way of doing things. We realized how much more effective things are when we have leadership on the floor, interacting with the employees, and getting feedback so we could do changes and take their recommendations to see if it makes sense, because they're basically the subject matter experts doing these things every day. So is there a way in the process that we could change things and make things more effective, not only to their own productivity, to the business itself? So there was a lot of meetings with, how do you do effective coaching? How do you make sure you have a good routine to make sure their observations are being done and you make time? Because everyone knows middle management's tough, where it's, I run out of time. But so you have to really schedule yourself to make time, because in the long run, it's gonna benefit you as production and efficiencies and things that you're usually dealing with or are chasing are right in front of you. So it was really important to gather that data and continue to gather the data with these changes and help the jobs of not only the associate on the floor, but the middle management group himself. So as Jim stated, we had to identify our best practices, and they spent some weeks here measuring and observing what we do here at School Specialty. And once they gathered, I should say, that information, and Jim's talked about it a little bit earlier, we would sit down and kind of challenge that sometimes, because we got to make sure the standards are correct, because there could be a process where we felt things were a little bit too lean, a little too aggressive on things, or, there was some room, right, where that job function, we can do better than that. And there was a lot of back and forth with the Alpine group to help dial those in. And then we really had to agree on how we're going to go back and correct some of those habits of different ways, because really we want consistency across the board, and that's where you're going to get your best data and your best efficiencies, is making sure everyone's doing it the same way all the time, because there's so many ways you can go around and they think it's easier, better the way they do it. Maybe sometimes that does happen, but then you have to make sure we go back through and train and retrain if that's the case, if the business feels it's the right way. So there was a lot of training sections after finding the best practices, going back with not only seasonals and temp labor, but it was the full times. And sometimes it was the full-time associates were the harder trained, because they were so used to doing it for years, because that's the way they've always done it. And so there was a lot of training meetings and training time. We were able to get into our training metrics, and we were able to reverse some of the bad habits in a short period of time. Observations are really a huge piece of the puzzle as far as labor management goes. Observations is where you really observe the person doing the job function or the job code that they are doing, and it's just like it says, it's an observation. We have forms, tablets that the forms are on that they are able to fill out. And they're really big to make sure you're listening, you're engaged, and you encourage feedback. Once we get that information, we do a performance monitoring where we kind of rate their performance based on the LMS and see where their standards are at, and if they're meeting or beating their standards or falling a little bit short. And once we gather that information, we can definitely have conversations with the associate, positive or negatively, on the performance that they have going on. A really big key was production tracking and production tracking boards. So our leadership team is responsible for tracking the productivity and making sure they're having those conversations, not only as in a group, but at the individual level. And then we also have production boards with their daily performance. We track that as far as daily, so what they did yesterday, weekly, and then at the overall month. And we also share not only the individual productivity, we also break it down into the groups like Jim talked about earlier, as long as a company as a whole on how we're sitting with our overall proficiencies.
Bryce, what would you say was taking the most time, surprising or not, but taking the most time in this process, and from a physical time standpoint, to ensure that you were doing what you needed to?
I'd probably have to say the training piece was probably the hardest. And like I stated, new hires and things like that, it was fairly easy. It was, well, we always used to do it that way. So we had to continue to go back and meet with the group and say, we understand and we get that, but we have to have everyone consistently. So that took time for our 10-year full-time associates to understand why we were going to the way we were going and the direction we were going, and really to get them to understand that by doing it that way, there's benefits.
That's fantastic.
So I know I spoke about observations before, but the importance of observations, I can't say enough. And some of the things that you really want to do when you go into your observation is be prepared. You don't want to get up to the employee and be fumbling around and really not knowing the job function that they're doing, or not being prepared with the screen up on the tablet or the piece of paper. And another big thing is the approach. You want to go into it with a very positive attitude and a very uplifting, and really ensure them that you're just observing. You're not there any other reason than observing their process. And you're watching for their skill and pace to make sure they're kind of meeting what they are, asking questions about the procedure, how they feel about it. Is there ways? You always kind of want to ask questions. We always kind of make sure there at least 3 questions come out of an observation of some sort. Obviously, safety is the number one thing, in our job, as far as our responsibilities, is making sure the job is safe, and identify anything that isn't safe to make sure that you bring that back and that's taken care of immediately. And really, you want to look also for is the feedback from the associate. How are they feeling? What concerns do they have? And make sure once you get that feedback, it's great to document it, but make sure you're coming back with a follow through and a follow up on, could it be a no on what their ask was, but give them a reason why. Is it a business decision, or is it a safety decision on why, or just the process itself? Or maybe there's some positive feedback that you can take back and think about it and meet with the group and really have a discussion. Hey, this might work. Now, how do we change our process to make it work and see the benefits and maybe help others hit their labor management goals?
All right, thanks, Bryce. So reasonable expectancies, we kind of talked about this a little bit earlier. We're taking a crawl, walk, run approach, and timing was everything. So we knew we had to get the labor management program up and ready for the back to school. We had 27 job functions that we were going to be measuring. And in the past, like we mentioned, we're kind of looking at historical averages, many ways to do those jobs. It was laborious to be able to document and track the actual results. And currently, the way we're looking at it is we're kind of walking. We've got the best practices, the consistency now, the reasonable expectancies. And when I say reasonable expectancies, we have units per hour goals for every job function, whether that's eaches per hour, cases per hour, or lines or pallets per hour. Our ultimate goal is to get the engineered labor standards in place where we've got the dynamic goals that are based on each individual work assignment, where we'll be able to take that and leverage that for a more robust recognition program. So that is kind of piggybacks on what Bryce is saying, that there's really no finish line, that we're all about how can we continue to enhance and improve with the labor management program. So let's get into results. Just tells a great story, and we turn the system on. And the great thing about labor is you can flip it on at any time you want once you've got the feeds and everything set up. And what we did is we were looking at it blind, and we said, all right, right now, here's what your people are doing. Here's your report card, if you will. And we turned it on. We were at 50% performance across all of those 27 job codes on a weighted average. We're currently at 91%. And that just is a great story. And it doesn't just happen. Like Bryce said, there's a lot of work and effort, just like anything in life. You got to work at it to get the rewards you want. And they really embraced it. They're doing the observations on a daily basis. They're coaching, they're counseling, they're driving consistency. Their employees are comfortable bringing up what's not working because they know they're not going to get yelled at for it. They're going to be actually encouraged to bring these things up so that we can, as a team, get rid of the noise in the system. And this is just a great improvement curve that just shows when you take that approach, the result that you can expect when you're rolling out labor management. And similarly, we said, okay, well, that's great for, your percent performance. That translated into their units per man hour from 31 to 55. We also report out what our actual savings are versus our ultimate optimal savings if we hit every single target, direct, indirect, within the building. And the nice thing about this, as you can see, $750,000 reduction in their variable labor spend year over year. And then finally, bottom line, their cost per case from April 2024 to April 2025, 16% reduction. Those are real numbers. Those are numbers that mean a lot, especially in today's world that we live in with all the uncertain trade aspects, to know that if costs are going to rise in one area, that you can do things to offset those with tools like labor management. So I'm going to toss it back to Bryce, and he's going to kind of follow up here on the culture change and kind of what it's meant to his operation.
Thanks, Jim. Yeah, culture change is a big one, right? The word change always seems to scare some people, especially once they've been in a facility for a long time and kind of did it the old ways. So we had to do daily reviews with the leadership teams, which that means they're meeting with their groups every day, having those reviews at the supervisory level and meeting with the team leads. They print out the documentation every morning. They review not only the areas that they're responsible for, but they're also reviewing at the individual level. And then we do a performance monitoring. So we have a labor management chart based off of those that have been observed, those that have not yet, and start looking at their performance at the individual level. And then we track that every day. And, as we look into that, we obviously really want to praise, the positive as well. It's very easy to find the low hanging fruit and really drive them to the coach to the negative side. But we also want to make sure we're having those conversations that people are doing really well to figure out what they're doing differently so we can maybe um, help the person that's struggling, or with what does that person do that's doing it very well and hitting 100% every day for someone that's lagging at the 65 to 70% range that we want to help grow. And a lot of times it's not that they're trying, but that may be a question that they were afraid to bring up, or it was a concern where so getting that feedback and doing that performance monitoring is very important. Goal achievement, with the goals, we talk about them every day on where we're sitting at in our stand-up huddles, and we're able to share them with the group. I share them with my leadership team, along with my boss, who also wants to see where we're sitting at. So making that available and visual to the people out on the floor is very, very important. Kind of the associate expectations was, definitely the training. It was definitely a really big piece, and making sure they understand. And we really had to communicate that and had many meetings before the actual go live and kickoff. It wasn't like we just announced it in a huddle and said, here comes labor management. We broke it down into groups, sat them down in a conference room, had a conversation, kind of let them know what LMS is, because that was really, a lot of people had no idea. And, answered any questions, basically stating, hey, am I working myself out of a job here? There was some of the uncertainties of, you're just going to be monitoring and watching me to be able to write me up. And that really wasn't it. And Jim stated that earlier in the conversation, that it's, we're trying to help you find a better work-life balance, especially for us in school specialty. We really have that peak season where our order intake exceeds our output of what our conveyor and what our equipment can do. So we know there's going to be overtime. So how do we help reduce that and help give you a work-life balance during the summer? Because in the past it was 10, 11 hours a day, 5 days a week, a 10-hour shift on Saturday. And it's through the whole 3 months of summer where no one has a summer. And we wanted to try to get back to that. So it's, people have weekends off. You're working maybe an 8 or a 9-hour shift and no Saturdays, and being able to explain that and really share with them what the goal was for LMS was taken in a very positive look from the associates. And what we found really, I found it was fantastic really is once we started posting performances and goals, people ask for them. Like if we don't have them out there by 9 a.m., we have people going, where we're at right after the 9 o'clock break. Where was I sitting yesterday? How did we do yesterday? Most humans don't want to be at the bottom of that list. So puts a little bit competitiveness in it as well, because they want to make sure they're doing well. No one wants to go out there and fail for the most part. And it really sparks some competitiveness within the job functions and job codes. And not only that, with other areas as well, as far as competitiveness. And it kind of makes it really gives a positive spin on how it shows that they care, because they really don't want to be sitting in that lower performance levels. Some of the lessons learned.
Mentioned sorry about that.
No.
You just mentioned job functions. Can you give us a better definition of what you see job functions and job codes being? Are they the same thing? Are they different? Can you kind of give us a view of what they are?
So your job code is based on the responsibility. Like we have 27 different standards as far as a job code that we measure. And really, and Jim's help me if I say it wrong, but job function, job code is really somewhat of the same.
Yeah, I think that one of them maybe you could say is a category, and then we get into the real specifics within that category. So we had replenishment is, a job function, but we had 7 different job codes
Underneath
within.
the replenishment, correct?
Yeah, because we had pallet replenishments, case
Correct.
replenishments, each replenish. So it just gets more granular, and it is a neat way within labor management where you can do your drill down, where you can say, show it to me at the functional level, how we doing in replenishment, and maybe if we're struggling, then you can go to the job codes and say,
Job
oh,
code.
it's one of these 2 job codes where we're doing low. Let's target our observations in those areas. So it's really geared towards a lot of that root cause analysis with that structure.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Lessons learned. One thing that we learned here was timing. Obviously, we were kind of under the gun here in Greenville as far as our timing for the LMS. I would recommend not trying to do it right before your peak season. And as I say that, we're doing our second facility here in Wisconsin right before peak season. It's just the way it worked out with our new WM that came on board. There was some delays there, so that kind of pushed us out to a very short window that Jim and his team are kicking off actually this week. And we have to get into place here in the next 10 weeks. Over communicate. It is what it is, right? You can't communicate it enough, and give the people the expectation on what's coming and make sure they understand what's coming. And you can't say it enough to the group to help them understand, which took, lots of meetings, lots of time off the floor at the beginning, just to make sure people were at their comfort level and knew what the expectations were with LMS. Take the crawl, walk, run approach. You definitely don't want to go into even the walk approach before you're really good at the crawl. You'll set standards and goals out there that are too high, and it's going to bring down kind of the spirit of the people on the floor if we start set expectations that we can't hit. Make sure you listen to the person that you observe. It's really important that you take that feedback that they give you and follow up with it. And like I said, it might not always be the answer they want to hear, but sometimes there is. But the biggest thing is that you follow up, have that conversation, and they appreciate that. The employees definitely appreciate the follow up. Stay engaged, and not only stay engaged, make sure you're doing it on the floor. We moved our supervisors leadership team had offices out on the floor. We moved them to work kiosks out onto the floor so they're more engaged, more visible to the employee, and to make sure that they're try to get at least 80% out on the floor doing observations along with just being engaged. We can see the difference when our supervisors are stuck in, or middle management's stuck in meetings and offices all day, or they're truly out on the floor interacting with the people. And it's a big difference. Make sure you create a production tracking prior to. We did that kind of after the fact, which made it a little convoluted as far as getting all the data and things, but really having that tracker prior to go live with all your associates listed and what you're looking to kind of track as far as observations, when and how they were done, kind of are they or not meeting expectations, and then being able to continue to track their daily productivity. So when you do go through and monitor that, you can see either the growth or the decline at a very easy search of a person. So having that in front of you is definitely a big tool once you get it kicked off.
And just to add to what Bryce had said, there's a lot of times people look for the perfect timing to roll out a program like labor management. There will never be a perfect time. And I think taking that crawl, walk, run, or that improve instead of wait for perfection mentality is one that was learned and appreciated during this rollout because they've gained so much. We know there's still more out there, but if we would have waited another year, that would have just been another year of, more expensive cost to ship the product. So finally, next steps, we have Greenville that Bryce runs. That was the first site. Mansfield, Ohio, they went second. They're live. We're actually here in Lindale, Wisconsin today. We did our kickoff meetings. So we are kicking that off and we're going to go live in July. Same type of thing. We've learned a ton in the first 2 sites and we're leveraging that to make sure we hit another pre-peak go live date. And then finally, accountability, recognition, and ELS are on the horizon. So with that, that leads us to any final questions as it relates to our webinar.
So our first question is do you have advice for someone who's got labor standards installed and is going through kind of a stall or kind of a level off situation where there's not really gains and they're actually getting some losses? What are some things that they could do to improve and kick themselves back off?
I think I'll start and I'll let Bryce jump in, but I think from my perspective, the engagement with the workforce is first and foremost why I see programs fall off, where it goes from being a people project, a project about continual improvement and accountability, to it falls back to the numbers. We're just posting numbers and there's a scorecard and we've forgotten the real foundation of labor management, which is people working together to improve, remove barriers, and solve problems. And that's really the way I look at the LMS tool. Is it's a calculator that helps you to know the score of the game, but you still have to do that day-to-day engagement with your employees.
No, I agree. I definitely would start some kind of observation program, making sure that there's some interaction with the employees out onto the floor to see what's kind of happening and start gauging the kind of the morale or the process out on the floor as well, just to make sure they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and hitting what they're supposed to be doing and not reverting backwards to old practices. And take back any feedback and have follow through with the group once you have those observations.
Good deal. Good deal. Another piece another question was, you kind of push on observations, you push on the coaching pieces. Did you have to do if you want to call it a training of your management staff to be able to make that happen in the proper way?
We did, Alpine did a nice job working with us. We did some different programs, soft skills training, how to approach a tough situation, because nobody likes having those conversations. But how do you handle it at the best approach? The observations, definitely, we started off very slow. We monitor them. The Alpine group also went out with us when we first started doing the observations, just to give feedback on how things went and how you could do things differently. But once you get past and do a few under your belt, it becomes pretty second nature. It came very quickly to my group. And once they got comfortable with it, it's 20 to 30 minutes out of their day. And if they do one a day, they're going to hit what they need to do. It's worth it. But we definitely had a lot of training on the soft skill side. How do you have a conversation when you're doing a coach? But we also wanted to make sure that they're having the conversation, make sure they have, because sometimes they get forgotten about on the positive side. Make sure you're following up with the people as well that are doing really, really well and getting some of that feedback, so we can kind of share some of that knowledge back with other people that might be struggling to see if we can help them increase our productivity.
All right. Thank you very much. Looks like that's the last question of the day. So I guess what we're looking at for the next webinar we have is TMS to WMS, which to implement first and why. This is going to be a panel session, so it's going to be a fun panel session that will be led by Michael Woolwin from Alpine. So this will be a great session for everybody. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today. This was wonderful, and I want to thank Jim and Bryce. You guys, I can't say how great it is talking to you guys about this. I learn something every day. So greatly appreciate your time. And thank you everybody for your time, for listening in on us. Have a great day.